Someone brings up a memory from when you were 13, a field trip, a birthday, the first time you got in real trouble. You nod along like you remember it. But if you're honest, most of it is gone, not blurry. Gone. And the strange part is, you were there for all of it. You were paying attention. You were arguably more emotionally awake at 13 than you are right now. So why does that whole stretch of your life feel like it happened to someone else? Try it right now. Picture your middle school hallway. You can probably see the color of the lockers. You can maybe hear the bell. But ask for something specific, an exact conversation, the exact order of a single afternoon, and the picture falls apart in your hands. You're left holding a mood instead of a memory, a feeling that something happened without the something. Most people blame this on ordinary forgetting. Too much time has passed, they say. Too many years, too many new memories stacked on top of the old ones, like boxes in a garage you never clean out. That explanation feels reasonable. It is also, according to new research, mostly wrong. Scientists just found something stranger. Your brain isn't losing those memories. It's actively locking them away, on purpose. And it's doing this during one of the most specific windows of your entire life. Not childhood, not adulthood. The narrow, chaotic stretch of late adolescence, right when you'd think your brain would want to hold on the tightest. But the truth behind it will change how you see yourself. Here's where it gets interesting. In July of 2026, a team at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, led by neuroscientist Dr. Jelena Radolovic, published a study that had nothing to do with forgetting on purpose. They were mapping how memory circuits mature in the brain. What they found instead was a kind of scheduled malfunction, one nobody expected. Deep in the brain sits a region called the retrosplenial cortex. Think of it as a filing room for your sense of place and time, the part of your mind that stitches an event to a location, a moment, a feeling of this happened here, back then. For years, researchers assumed this filing room finished construction early, sometime in childhood, and just sat there quietly doing its job. Radolovic's team assumed the same thing, at first. Instead, they found something under construction again, years later than anyone expected. Around the transition from early to late adolescence, in mice, the protective structures wrapped around neurons in this region, called paraneuronal nets, began to break down. Picture scaffolding coming off a building that isn't finished yet, or a librarian pulling the protective covers off a shelf of books mid-renovation. These nets are what usually keep memory circuits locked in place, stable, reliable. When they weakened, the memories stored in that region became difficult to access. Not damaged, not deleted, just for a while out of reach. There's a second layer to this that makes it even stranger. Alongside the nets, the researchers tracked a protein called parvalbumin, found in a class of neurons that normally help keep memory circuits calm and organized. During that same late adolescent window, parvalbumin levels dropped too. The whole neighborhood destabilized at once, nets and neurons together, like a construction crew tearing out wiring and plumbing in the same week. And here's the detail that should stop you. This didn't happen everywhere in the brain. The hippocampus, the region most people associate with memory, stayed untouched. This was localized, specific, deliberate, in the way that biology is deliberate, which is to say, not an accident, but a design choice nobody asked your permission for. Ask yourself something. Why would a healthy, functioning brain choose to make its own memories harder to reach? The researchers have a theory, and it reframes the whole story. They believe this isn't a flaw, it's a renovation. As you move out of early adolescence, your brain is under enormous pressure to adapt. New environments, new social rules, new versions of who you're supposed to be. A freshman walking into a high school for the first time doesn't need perfect recall of a 6th grade lunch table. What they need is bandwidth, room to encode a flood of new faces, new dangers, new rules about who to trust. Holding on to every vivid detail from 2 years earlier might actually get in the way of that adjustment. So the brain does something almost ruthless. It temporarily deprioritizes the old files to make room for processing the new ones. Dr. Radolovic put it plainly in describing the work. The reorganization appears to prioritize access to memories formed in adulthood at the expense of the ones formed in early adolescence. In other words, your brain isn't hoarding space. It's making a bet about which memories you'll need most, and for a while, your 13-year-old self loses that bet. This is the twist most people don't see coming. Those early teenage memories don't disappear. According to the study, they come back later in adulthood. Once the retrosplenial cortex finishes its renovation and rebuilds those protective nets, access to those old memories spontaneously returns. But they come back changed, less specific, less anchored to exact places and moments, softer around the edges like a photograph left in the sun too long. That's why trying to remember being 13 feels less like opening a drawer and more like reaching into fog. The memory isn't gone. It's been quietly rewritten into something vaguer, something more like an impression than a record. This isn't the first time scientists have noticed the brain doing something like this. More than a century ago, Sigmund Freud gave an early version of this phenomenon a name: infantile amnesia, the mysterious blank most people have covering their first 3 or 4 years of life. He assumed the cause was psychological, memories buried because they were too disturbing to keep. Modern neuroscience has mostly moved away from that explanation. The blank isn't repression, it's construction. A young brain that hasn't yet built the neural scaffolding needed to store and later retrieve a coherent, dated memory in the first place. For decades, that early gap got most of the scientific attention. What the Einstein study suggests is something nobody had really gone looking for: a second, quieter version of the same process, arriving right on schedule during the teenage years. This time, it isn't a brain that hasn't finished building its filing system yet. It's a brain that already has a working filing system and chooses, for a while, to take it apart and rebuild it. Memory researchers like Patricia Bauer, who has spent years studying how autobiographical memory develops across childhood, have long pointed out that the way we remember our own past isn't fixed. It's a moving target, constantly being reorganized as the brain itself reorganizes. This new study gives that idea a physical mechanism, a biological reason. A neat, almost architectural explanation for why your 15-year-old self feels less like a memory and more like a rumor. Here's a small, specific detail worth sitting with. In the study, the researchers used a method called context fear conditioning, essentially teaching a mouse to associate one very particular space with a mild, startling event, then testing later whether the mouse still recognized that exact space. During early adolescence, the mice learned this association sharply and specifically. By late adolescence, that same memory became much harder to trigger, as if the file had been misplaced in the middle of the renovation. But the memories that came back later weren't just fuzzy, they were generalized. A mouse that had learned to fear one very specific space during early adolescence, later, as an adult, feared spaces that only vaguely resembled it. The original, sharp memory had been replaced with something broader, less precise, but somehow more flexible. That's not memory loss. That's memory turning into something closer to instinct. Think about what that means for you. The version of 13-year-old you that you carry around isn't a recording. It's an impression that got filed away, misplaced during a renovation, and handed back to you years later in a slightly different shape than it started in. The awkward conversation you're sure you remember. The exact words someone said to you in a hallway. Some of that detail may never have made it through the renovation intact. There's a modern mirror to all of this, and it's easy to miss. People love to say that adolescence is when you find yourself, but this research suggests something almost the opposite. Adolescence might be when your brain temporarily loses track of who you were, specifically so it can build who you're about to become. The fog over your early teenage years isn't a malfunction. It's the receipt for growth you don't remember paying for. Think about how this plays out in ordinary life. Someone pulls up an old class photo, and half the names are gone. A parent recalls in vivid detail the exact thing you said at 14, while you have no memory of saying it at all. You probably assumed that means your parent has the better memory. What this study suggests is something different. It means your parent's retrosplenial cortex wasn't the one going through a renovation that year. Yours was. There's also a quieter, heavier layer here. Dr. Radulovich's team noted they're still investigating whether remembering those early adolescent experiences comes at a cost to how well the brain adjusts to new ones. If that turns out to be true, it means the very process that clouds your memory of being 13 might be the same process that let you survive being 13. The fog isn't a side effect, it might be the point. And it raises a question worth asking, honestly. If your brain edits itself this heavily during adolescence, quietly deciding which memories deserve a clear signal and which get filed under vague impressions, how much of your personal history is actually a record, and how much of it is a story your brain reconstructed after the fact, using whatever fragments survived the renovation. Maybe that explains why old friends remember the same events so differently. You aren't lying to each other. You were both handed back a slightly different reconstruction of the same moment, shaped by whatever your own retrosplenial cortex decided was worth keeping sharp. So the next time someone brings up a memory from when you were 13, and you find yourself nodding along to details you can't quite picture, you'll know what's actually happening. It's not that the memory is gone. It's that you were there for all of it, and your brain quietly decided years ago to hand you back a softer version. The truth behind it doesn't just explain your foggy teenage years. It changes how you see yourself.